So thank you so much for joining us, everybody. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available on YouTube very shortly. As I said at the start, please do keep yourselves on mute if possible. This will be being recorded. If you would like to ask any questions, and we really encourage you to do that, please do use the chat box. Or if it's quite a long and involved comment you want to make, just pop your hand up. I'll be keeping an eye on that, and there will be time for a few more questions at the end. So there's a few new people today, so just a few introductions. My name's Rebecca. I'm editor of Co-op News, which is a magazine and news website about co-ops and cooperators around the world. And with me is Sarah Aldred, who's head of international partnerships at the Co-op College. So the college is the educational arm of the movement that works internationally. So together these organisations, along with others including Cooperatives UK, Central Co-op and the Co-op Group, have been putting on events over the past 2 years, Sarah, 3 years, to encourage and support women. Because from the very start, the cooperative movement has led the way in campaigning for gender equality. And there's been so many inspirational women working in the Co-op movement from the very start, who are proud of the role and of working in the sector that has really clear values and principles. So the Co-op Women's Voices grew out of something called the Co-op Women's Challenge, which started just over 10 years ago in Manchester and was designed to empower women working in the co-op movement. And it asked questions like, how can women support each other? How can we build confidence? How can we ensure a healthy work-life balance? So Sarah and I set up Co-op Women's Voices to answer some of these by speaking to some of the amazing women that are in our movement around the world and find out really what makes them tick. So today we have the absolute honour of welcoming Anna Tibblin, who is Secretary General of We Effect. Anna is also on the board of Svensk Cooperation and the ICME Foundation and also Amnesty International Sweden. So I can't wait to hear more about all of those. So I'm going to hand over to Sarah now, who'll be asking the questions. As I said, please do keep yourself on mute and there'll be time for questions at the end.
Oh, thanks, Bex, and welcome, Anna, and welcome everybody here, actually. And just to reiterate what Bex was saying, actually, the purpose of these Women's Voices events are to be quite informal, and they're also to just to understand the source of the women we speak to, the source of their lives, really. So we're trying to get to understand and hear more about Anna, the woman, the young woman, the girl, really, and who's led to Anna working for, and being Secretary General at We Effect. So with that as a premise, Anna, welcome. And my first question, it's a very, very loose question, really, just to kind of start us, is just talking about your early life and some of your key influences, really. Can you just talk a little bit, where were you born? Where were you brought up? Who was around you when you were growing up?
Will do. Thanks so much. Thank you, Sarah, and also thank you, Rebecca, and thank you for this opportunity. And let me just start by saying I'm not only absolutely flattered, but also a bit nervous, just so that you're with me, because I'm not used to actually talking about personal things. We can all talk about what we do at work, who we are and what drives us, but actually bringing it back to our person, maybe we're not used to doing that, and maybe we should practice more. So thanks for the opportunity. I was born in Sweden, but moved at a very young age to the US. My father was offered a job there, so we arrived as a family in New York and actually lived in a basement, traveled in a trailer from New York over to California, and my father's job didn't work out, so he went to night school to become a contractor and started building houses instead. Prior to that, he was a sportsman. He before I was born was world champion a few times in motocross, so it was a sports family that I was born into. But here we were in California with this entrepreneurial parents, and lived in, I would say, very typical at the time immigrant communities, mostly Latin American immigrant communities, and sort of that's where I have my first years and early upbringing. It's in different immigrant communities, and that's formed me in the sense of I think even if I, in a Swedish context, am majority norm, right? White, middle-class woman, and so on. I still grew up in an immigrant community, even if I, of course, was privileged because of skin color and so on, but still seen as the outsider. And I think I've had enormous advantage of that in my life, because it's a very important perspective to carry forward.
Yeah,
Lived in the States
yeah.
until about, moved back to Sweden when I was 11.
And do you want to say a bit more about that immigrant upbringing then? You know, because I know when we had a pre-brief last week, really, and it's just really fascinating, really, around being somewhere else, you know, and being brought
Mm.
up somewhere else in a community, and how that shaped you. Well, so what were some of the key things that you think shaped you in that experience?
I mean, what I think in hindsight is that, I mean, immigrant communities in this specific context were also very organized along both ethnic but also community lines. So
Yeah.
lots of single mothers who, because they were single mothers, helped each other. We were not in any way, underprivileged or so on, but these were our friends, which also meant that you saw and met people working together to solve common needs or common problems. Uh, and I would say that goes across community lines. At school, um, I mean, my early school, my best friend was Chinese. My neighbors were Latinos. I mean, access to lots of different communities and a lot of interesting lunch boxes, I might add.
Yeah, no, it sounds fascinating actually.
Mm.
So you ended up, when did you return back to Sweden now?
Returned back when I was 11 years old, and again because my parents they realized that, hey, our kids don't speak Swedish, because we hadn't returned to Sweden in all of these years because of migration issues and so on. We didn't have a green card, and grandparents were getting old, and identity issues. So we moved back. I couldn't speak Swedish at the time. I started a Swedish school in the north of Sweden, boondocks. We're talking boondocks, and which was also an experience. It was like doing the same thing all over again, being the outsider. I don't know if you remember, you're probably not old enough, but the trend was at the time, all of the kids were wearing these jeans, like these like balloon bottom jeans. I came with the bell bottoms. That was wrong. So you spend the evening cutting them off and trying to fix them, and so on. My mother understood absolutely nothing. And so, but again, it's the outsider coming into the community. Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. And Bex, we asked you to share some pictures actually, so it might be helpful if you can share some pictures. Actually, there was 4 actually, so maybe if we can just talk through, because that'll then move us on to talking about just growing up really. So as part of sharing the pictures then, what we did was we asked Anna to just share some key pictures that kind of depict some key moments in her life really. So this was the first one. So just want to talk to these pictures, Anna. So I love this picture, but it's interesting what you say about it. So
Sure. Thanks. And the reason I'm sharing this picture is because I only found it a few weeks ago. So this is a picture that I haven't seen before or prior to that, nor had my mother. I found it in an archive. And so this is our family. I'm the one with the curly blonde hair. You wonder what happened. And my brother and sister. And what's interesting about this picture, I mean, it's a nice family picture, but what's interesting is it's taken 1971. And you see my dad, he's in the center, he's holding my brother, the baby on his arm. And this is being done for newspaper. Now, the thing is that my father was not around as when we were kids. And I'm not going to, go into that and talk about it. But what's interesting about the picture is that the photographer and the newspaper wanted to put him as a family father. So this picture is a very nice picture, but it's not a very true picture in that sense. And I thought it was interesting because if you think about all of the pictures that we see that we use in work, etc., etc., how little do we actually know about what's really going on behind? And that's why I wanted to share it. Besides, I think it's a great picture.
It is, but it's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, especially with, you know, we use image all the time, you know, across social media. The curate story, you know, you know, and I guess this is a curated image, isn't it?
Exactly. Exactly.
So, but I mean, it's very atmospheric when you look at it. But like you say, it's created in a way that, yeah. So there's three others. So while we're here then on these pictures, it would be useful just to maybe just talk through the other three, because we want to just, so this is your upbringing, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
But, so this picture, why do you want to share this one?
Well, I chose this. This is in Swedish Parliament. This is for a parliamentary committee, and why this is important is that We Affect, the organization I work for, is the Swedish Cooperative Movements Development Organization. But we're actually the world's largest cooperative development organization. But it's only in the past three and a half years that we've been working with advocacy, that we've been working towards policymakers in Sweden. We hadn't done that before. And that's entailed such an enormous change in the way we work and how we prioritize when we have recognized ourselves as an organization, as an actor in our own right, and not only a facilitator of funding or development methods or whatever, but actually saying that development is politics. It's a political issue, and we have a role to play as a Swedish development organization in relation to our policymakers and others to enable space for our partner organizations in the countries where we work. And that's why I chose this picture, because it's such a change in the way we work, and it's been, I would say, also very successful because it's made us more relevant.
Exactly, and we'll come back to this around this theme actually, but and then there's this super selfie image, which is
the super selfie. Well, this is not all of them, but quite a number of my colleagues here at We Affect, and I think like most of us, at least living in privilege during the pandemic, we wound up behind our screens working on different platforms such as the one we're on today. And for our organization, it also meant enormous change. Not only that we, for the first time, I would dare to say, actually saw each other, because in the digitalization and sitting in these meetings and so on, there's also a democratic aspect. You all have exactly the same space on that screen, independently of where you're sitting in the world, and maybe dependent on your internet connection, of course. But it enabled us to come together. It enabled us to become a global organization for the first time. And we chose to symbolize this through our super selfie to remind us that we are many people working in this organization, not only the people in head office, etc., etc. So I really like this picture. That's why I wanted to share it.
Yeah, and it's been fascinating during lockdown, wasn't it? That, you know, you're also in people's personal spaces quite often, and you just see a different aspect of, you know, it's just you just get a different sense of people, really, aren't you? Really, and it's
but also the awareness that I mean, we were sitting in Sweden, and yes, affected, but we never had any hard lockdown. Our schools were open for large parts of the time, but for our colleagues, I mean, single parents, etc., sitting with children at home, hard lockdowns, and lousy internet connections, worried about losing their jobs. I mean, the conditions are quite different, actually.
Yeah,
so just an awareness about that.
Can I ask one thing, Anna?
Sure.
There's a picture of a black sheep in there. I've just noticed.
That was just a colleague who just sent it in and said, let's just put this in. So there wasn't any larger meaning. It was just like okay, you don't want to share a picture of yourself, so we can put this in. It's all right.
Well spotted, Bex.
Yeah, well done. Yeah.
And no, it's a great, you know, and I recognise Hans there. Actually, he's a great colleague. I work with on the Corporate Development platform. So, anyway, the fourth picture, which is this one. So, who's this?
Yeah, this is one. I think when we spoke last week, you asked me, okay, so who are your female role models, etc. And this is one of them. Her name is Teresa, and she's Zimbabwean. And just really quickly about her story. I mean, we all read and take part of development stories, etc., and these enormous and incredible journeys that people do. But I think this one is a bit special. Teresa, at the age of 63, participated in a training in Zimbabwe out in the rural areas that had to do with women's land rights. And she sort of went like, huh? What? Do I actually have land? Do I have a right to this land that my husband has been, managing during our whole marriage? I mean, they have 12 kids. I think by now they have like 25 grandkids. Teresa's been working in this land her whole life. She has never had a say on what they were going to grow. She had never had access to the income that the produce when they went to the market to sell. Her husband kept the money and so on. Anyway, Teresa went home and she said, hey, dude, I have a right to this land too. Husband said no. So she moved out, and she, in the corner of their sort of plots, it was a sizable piece of land, she built this, little hut, and she went on strike for everything, food, cleaning, sex, you name it. She totally went on strike, and she stayed there for over a year until the husband sort of backed off and said, okay, I'll share my land with you. And then one thing led to another, and Teresa became very active in the local organization, which is a partner organization to WeAffect called Women and Land Zimbabwe. And she ran for local council. So she's actually in politics representing women. And she started this being over 60 years old. So I think the take home is it's never too late. It really never is. And she's a really cool person. So that's why I wanted to share her story quickly.
No, and that's really powerful, actually. I do think there is something about, older women, it's that, it's the power that women gain as they get older, really.
Yeah.
And it's that there's a really real beauty in aging, actually, and kind of knowing your rights more probably. But that's a sweeping generalization. But anyway, going back to you, Anna. So we've got you to a point where you're kind of a teenager back in Sweden. So you then, I'm really curious to talk to you then about, you end up in Nicaragua and El Salvador. So how do you end up there?
When you go back, you think, well, how do things happen? But I was very engaged in the solidarity movement and basically probably just about every solidarity organization around. I was probably a member, but there was one volunteer organization but I applied and I went to an interview and I was recruited as a volunteer, a journalist volunteer in Nicaragua. And at the time, most of those volunteers were older than I was. I was 21, and I'd been working at the local newspaper, and so I had some journalistic experience. And I was recruited to work at a farmers magazine, the Farmers Union the Farmers Cooperative Union, may I add, in Nicaragua, and their magazine. There were two journalists working there, and they thought, hey, this is a great opportunity to get some free workforce we don't have to pay for from the Swedish organization sending volunteers. I think that's what they thought. But what they got was a young Swedish journalist, sort of half, with some sort of half lousy Spanish, who they had to deal with. And what came out of that, which was really great, was that whilst these two Nicaraguan men who had, been to university, they had their degrees and so on. But as we know also in many in countries where opportunity may not be as rife as it is in Sweden and other places, if you have an academic degree, you have to show that you have an academic degree. So we had this farmers magazine for farmers who were almost not literate, but you had, headlines with like 15-letter words and 3 lines and very small text. And so nobody, of course, understood that magazine. But then I came along and so it became like, well, if I understood it, well, probably the farmers would understand it too. So it was actually, it just became an adult education project. And it worked out quite well. But I stayed there for some time, and then parallel to this,
can I just ask, before you went there then, so were you doing journalism back in Sweden?
Yeah, I was. But again, I have no academic education whatsoever. I left high school, started working, and then I had to do with wanting to earn my own income, moving away from home, and so on. But I asked to start working at a local newspaper because I was interested in writing and had done that, and got a job. One thing led to the other, etc., etc.
Yeah, and I just think that's there again about you being a role model for other women, and it's that, it's there's so many routes to where you are now, and it's not, it doesn't, it's you're a really good example of actually learning by doing. You put yourself in positions and learned as you've gone along, which is a real, it's really good role model, really. When we were listening to you last week as well.
Or just being nuts, you could do it both ways, and not having the patience, and just say, because honestly, what can happen? The worst thing that can happen is that it doesn't work, or that somebody says no. And it's still based on a situation of privilege when you can actually do that. So what can you stand to lose?
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, I'm going to zoom you back then to so this is a co-op. So it was a co-op in Nicaragua, wasn't it? That you'd set
Totally.
up? Yeah, and it was already set up as a cooperative when you landed there. Yeah. So that was your first taste of cooperatives then.
I would say so. And then what happened parallel to this was that the peace process or the peace accords were signed in El Salvador. And you had quite a number of Salvadoranian refugees living in Nicaragua. And so they returned to El Salvador and actually asked this Swedish organization I was working for they wanted support from certain groups. And so I was asked if I wanted to go to El Salvador and help support the setting up, in that case, of one of the radio stations. This was Radio Farabundo Marti, which was the guerrilla radio station, clandestine during the war, but after the war, came down to San Salvador and became a public commercial radio station. And where the staff were former guerrilla soldiers, but also students, journalist students who had sort of joined the struggle. But now it was a matter of how do we turn this into a commercial viable business, and where the discussions were, are we going to accept adverts from Coca-Cola? Do we do that? So it was sort of the whole setting up, and the way that company worked was in cooperative form. Yeah. So it was also a cooperative take on business development, if you will. Incredibly exciting, difficult times.
And how many members were there? So in terms of the co-op, was it small, or was it?
There was an injustice in that all staff were not invited to participate. It had to do with how many years you'd been in the struggle, and this sort of thing. But the number of people working there, top of my head, maybe 10, somewhere between 10 and 15.
Yeah.
And then this, getting the independence from the political party that had been behind during the war, and sort of journalistic independence and so on. So it was an important time, and the people working at this radio station were incredibly brave and enormously talented. They really were.
Yeah, it's a pair of those grassroots activities, isn't it, during those conflicted times, really. But and what were the key some key things then? What were some key? I mean, it sounds really trite, but there's some key learnings or some key insights for you in both those spaces, because you then go back to Sweden. So what were some key things that you took from that?
I think it's the experience, and just the sort of like the proof is in the pudding, isn't it? That democracy, like cooperative models or just working together, is definitely more complicated, but definitely better. You are stronger, you have achieved better results, and you can also support each other. And I think if we take the radio station, just the fact that journalistic integrity was built because people could do it together. And I mean, you could compare that to a union or anything else. People are stronger together. And I think I've seen that the proof of that so many times that becomes not only a key learning, but I think an integral part of just who I am through my experience.
Yeah. So this then takes you back. So you end up back in Sweden. So, and you set up a co-op in Sweden. So again, can you just talk us through that journey back to Sweden? And because it's just fascinating, and I want to give a picture of your life, Anna. So you so how do you end up back in Sweden, and what do you start doing then?
Okay, all right. So when I go to Latin America, I say, seeing everybody else, I say, okay, well, I'm going to do this for a few years, but if there's one thing I'm not going to do, it is I am not going to wind up with some Latin partner or man. I'm independent, etc. So what happens? I fall in love and I get pregnant. So that's what happens. I come back to Sweden pregnant with a Salvadoranian father, and we decide, okay, we'll start our lives in Sweden, and had 2 kids. He went to university in Sweden and got his degree and did really well. And I went back to the magazine that this organization had, which was world famous, of course, called News from Latin America, and where we basically worked on portraying the situation for social movements in Latin America. And I'm sure at one time we probably knew the the abbreviations of every single movement through that continent. It feels like sometimes when you think back.
Yeah. And was that formed as a cooperative?
That specific magazine was not, but when I had my second child, there was a group of journalists that we were working in different sectors, different geographic areas, and so on. We said, hey, let's do something together instead. So I left the magazine and formed a cooperative company together with these friends. And we called ourselves Context. We had no idea what we were doing, really. We'd been sort of working as freelancers and so on. And it went really well. I think we happened to, we caught a niche market that nobody had covered at that time. So we were working with the journalistic analysis, but also started doing things like evaluations of development projects, country analysis for the foreign ministry and so on. So we pooled all of this experience that we had together, and helped each other develop into these new markets, if you want to call it that. And it was a fantastic experience. And they're still going, by the way, and doing well.
So I've just seen Maggie's email. Welcome, Maggie. So why? So we're just moving on, probably more now to cooperatives and your journey in court. So why, Why do you think, or do you think cooperative? I mean, I'm assuming you do think co-ops are a good thing, but why do you think co-ops are a good thing, and why now a lot of your life is now spent talking and thinking and working with co-ops?
I think that we have the different. I mean, if we just talk about the cooperative model, what is it? It's a member-based means of doing business, right? It's part of a social economy, and if we depart from the fact that um, sort of have sort of like a rights-based approach, all people are equal, all people have the same rights, etc., and wanting to contribute generally to a democratic way of working. So if that's a point of departure, I think cooperatives are great in the sense that uh, you can do business, make it transparent, make it successful, ensure that everybody's on board. It takes a little bit more work, but the outcome is so much stronger. You have stronger products, if you want to use that line of speaking. You sort of have a way of squeezing out the best of all of the different members. It's a great way of just putting all of the capacity on the joint table and saying, how do we do this in the best possible way? And I think if you say, okay, I'm working now for We Affect, the Cooperative Movements Development Organization. We've been doing the same thing basically since we were formed in 1958. And you could say, okay, is that just because you have such a lousy imagination and you can't think of anything else to do? I said, no, we might have that anyway, but no, it's not that. It's because it works. Cooperative development works. It's maybe not always, the flashiest or most exciting thing when you're doing adverts and so on, but it works. It works in development, and it works also in when it comes to, business. It's a fantastic model.
Yeah, and just going back to that comment where you said development is political, what do you mean by that within the context? I mean, I kind of have every sense of what you mean, but could you just explain what you do mean by co-ops? So how do you think co-ops can engage in issues of our time, really? Because that was a question I was going to ask a bit later, really, because there's so much going on in the world.
Yeah.
And why do you think co-ops, or do you think co-ops are well placed to address that?
I think, without sounding like, some sort of billboard, but I think co-ops are the future, and we see it already now. But to describe that, let's go back a couple of years and say, say in the 80s and so on, a lot of cooperative businesses, if I can use that expression, didn't really want to identify as co-ops because it was seen by many as something, old-fashioned, dusty, something of the past, inefficient, costly, boring, grey, whatever. And then something happened as we started talking about, talking more about the need for a healthy environment, talking about sustainability issues. We had the Millennium Development Goals. Today we have the SDGs and so on. And the cooperative companies started saying, wait a minute, there's something here for us because we're working with these issues. We're working according to cooperative principles. Maybe our companies can actually fit into this or slot into the new fashion, if you will. So some cooperative businesses did it for fashion. You started saying to customers, employees, members, yes, we're very sustainable, working towards these SDGs, etc. Whilst others are very much doing it for real. And I think we can see increasingly in a Swedish context and in others that those who are doing it for real are also getting payback. You can see that during the pandemic, which companies proved to be more resilient? The cooperative companies. Which companies are attracting young workforce because you're looking for more value-based companies? The cooperatives, or some of them, or at least those who are doing it in that way. So I think there's such a strong model in that sense if you take it up, but you have to do it for real.
Yeah, and so going on to women then, so why do you think co-ops are particularly helpful for women? Or do you?
I think they can be particularly helpful for women, but I don't think there's not automatically. But I think the fact that a cooperative model is per definition democratic. It's one person, one vote. It has to be transparent if it's going to work. And it's also based on the premise that we're stronger together. So in that sense, it's sort of a safe space for joint development, isn't it? For sort of collective leadership development. And I think if we also depart from the fact that most cooperatives are formed to address a need in society, a need among a group of people or whatever it is. That is also, I think, a space that unfortunately attracts women. If we talk about the family space, for example, I mean, we work with smallholder farmers around the world.
Yeah.
Who is ensuring that the children have enough to eat? Who is ensuring that you grow food crops as opposed to cash crops? It's women. So in that case, from a care perspective, it'll predominantly be women in those sectors. But then look at the other sectors, insurance or housing or whatever it is. I mean, it's not gender limited in that sense. But I think the model in itself will attract women more. But still, you can't. You still have the same patriarchal norms. You still have the same. There's nothing automatic about it. But maybe the chances of actually addressing equality issues are larger if you have a democratic point of departure. I think if we look in a Swedish context, the Swedish the cooperative companies, the 100 largest represent approximately 10% of the Swedish economy. And if you look at women in leadership positions, I mean, just that indicator, it's twice as high as it is in what we would say the other business sector.
Yeah, yeah. And do you feel that coming on to that point around female leadership in cooperatives, I mean, do you think it's a different type of leadership being part of a co-op and leading? I mean, you're a leader of a very large, organisation, and do you feel your leadership is different because you're part of a cooperative? You're leading a cooperative organisation.
I think I hope I'm held accountable in the sense that it bloody well better be would be my response to that. Because if we as a cooperative development organization don't walk our own talk, then what are we?
Yeah.
And so I'd very much like to think so, but I also expect and I hope that I'm held accountable for that.
Do you think, and just because I know we talk, I mean, and me and Bex have talked quite a bit in the past around values, the co-op values and ethics and stuff. Does that influence your leadership? Is that something that, as an organisation you talk about, when you were in all the other co-ops you've been part of, what has it been that's made it feel different for you and kept you going back? Has it been the values?
Absolutely. Yeah, it has been the values. And if I depart from We Affect as a development organization, I mean, we work and we work hard to do it in practice. We work rights-based, right?
Yeah.
Departing from all people's equal value, rights, etc., etc. And if you look at, I mean, the whole package of human rights as defined in conventions, etc., etc., you have that. You put the cooperative values next to them. There's a total overlap. It's the same thing. Some words may differ and so on. So if you say that we work rights-based as a method, working in a cooperative form is a way to do that in practice.
Because it lends, absolutely. Because it lends.
Yeah. And if you then say, okay, that's in this development organization context, but then you look at the other sort of cooperative, more like businesses, it's not only about, I don't think I'm necessarily a better person than anybody else. Absolutely not. But I've seen that it works. We're stronger. We have, if it's in a business, you have better products. You're more sustainable. So it's just a smarter way of doing things.
Yeah, and I guess but there's a lot of confidence in that I would say, because it's less ego driven. I guess the ego goes somewhere else or gets diluted, I guess, doesn't it? Because it's more rooted in
or the profit, right? If you want to link ego to profit or whatever. So we're not, cooperatives aren't profit driven in that way. You still have to make profit, but it also goes back to
exactly.
Okay, so we've got a couple of questions coming in on the chat. So if I could just jump in.
Of course you can, because I'll be going to the final
do that. So Judith says, Anna makes such a good point. This is referring to an early point you made, Anna, about cooperation in cooperatives takes more work to set up and run successfully than other organisations, but they are stronger and more effective in the long run, just like effective democracy. And she follows that up with a question saying, has Anna got any ideas for getting the cooperative message out to society? This still doesn't seem to be happening enough. And then Sabir, like on the back of that, says, hi Anna, nice to see you. How can we better bring cooperatives together to deliver better impact on the ground? So I guess there's almost like two sides to the same coin there. There's the making the impact in terms of delivery, and then there's actually making the impact in terms of people knowing that co-ops are an option to use to solve problems, as you said, to like solve that need.
These are like $1 million questions, but I think for the first one, I think a lot of organizations and cooperatives that at least that I've come in contact with, it's like we try to figure out these really clever communication plans, and we try to find new words and terminologies, etc., as opposed to trying to fill the words that we have. Some years back, in my organization, we weren't allowed to use the word cooperative because it was too complicated. Cooperative development, it was seen as something old and dusty, like we talked about before. I think we have to do exactly the opposite. We have to embrace it and fill it with meaning. And that's easy to say, but I don't think we can back off from it, and not back off either from the challenges that it entails. And remember to say that a cooperative business also has to be profitable. It also has to be, it has all of these things. It's a business, and with a viable model. So it's filling the words with meaning, but not trying to find new words. I think that's how I think we need to go about it as a movement. And I think bringing cooperatives together to deliver better, I think that's happening all the time. I think it's happening, in our work on or development work in the countries where we work, I think cooperatives are coming together in different types of sector organizations. I think it's happening here in Sweden through sort of joint advocacy initiatives such as Cooperative Sweden, which is a network of all cooperative companies. So maybe the answer to your questions would be, and nice to see you too, by the way, is to go back to the cooperative values and say, okay, well, what does it mean when we say that we're going to collaborate? What does it mean, concern for community? Those are values, cooperative values. Use them, roll them out. So I think it's just stick to the values and ensure that they're more than just words in a strategy paper, but see, how do you live them? How do you work them? How do you take them out on a daily basis?
I think there's so much good. We effects do such good storytelling, actually, and I think it's. Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
And but it does, and I think storytelling. And we spoke to Sarah Vicari last year, and who heads up the Around the World Coop as well. And it's just there are some, when you unpick, there's just so much stories, and there's so much really good. And I guess it's also just pushing those stories out there around all the different sectors, and it's. We effects are incredible at doing that. So. So Anna, there's a couple of questions because and then anybody else, any other questions, we're gonna finish at, well, it's coming to 12 o'clock in the UK, so 1 o'clock everywhere else. So the other question then, because we there again, going back to why we do these, it's about, you know, it's about you're a role model for all kinds of people, you know, and it's so the question is, people looking in, you know, listening to you, what messages would you like to give to women and young women in the world we're in, based on all your experience? That is a big question, I know.
That's a very big question. I think maybe just to say, have the courage to believe in yourself and take help from other women, from men, from people around you.
Yeah.
Ask for help and do it. And I think if you're in a position of privilege where you can actually take a chance, take a risk, or try something new, then do it. Because the worst thing that can happen is that you get no. And most of the time, that's not dangerous.
Yeah.
And you'll learn from it. But believe in yourself.
Yeah, and I think there is something about that female solidarity as well, isn't it? Which can give women confidence, can't it? So yeah.
And not because can I also say that, you know, I've been thinking through sort of my professional life and people have been very important. I'll say some, or like two male bosses that I've had, and my first boss here at We Effect was a man. His name is Lennart, and he. I mean, yeah, he had his issues, like don't we all, and so on. But he was incredibly good in supporting women or female leaders, and at one point when we were working as regional directors, you know, I was working in Southern Africa, someone else in Eastern Africa and Latin America and so on. We were all single mothers. Sort of asked him, so like, I mean, do you have like a thinking behind this? And he says, yeah, actually I do. One, he shared that he in the 70s, he was a father with also small children, and he was left. He had to care for these women himself. He was a CEO, so he was one of these. He was the business guy in the suit with a baby in the boardroom, and that made him a very good boss because what he could see was one, that you have the capacity. Two, that if you're a single mother, you're always going to make the right decisions. He said, at least when it comes to work. Because you have more important issues at home. You're not going to sit late in the office, and we don't want those types of bosses anyway.
Yeah.
And I thought it was very brave from an older white man in that sense. So he was important, I think, to just show that. And also, as a young person, I worked with a newspaper with an editor who was incredibly good at just developing people's own capacity. Just go for it, do it. But he couldn't write. He couldn't write, but he supported everyone else to become really good writers. So it's very inspirational people, but they were both men. So I mean, it's important to remember. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's been interesting with these, you know, and that's what we try, and probably I haven't articulated it well today, but it's men as well. You know, there are amazing men out there.
Yeah, feminist men. Yeah,
supportive of, you know, a woman's journey, really. And I think, yeah, and so thank you for kind of saying that and raising it, really.
So you've got a couple of questions, like answers on the back of that. Just in response to this, Maggie said, third age, is it third age, isn't it, Maggie? Needs more female solidarity. Single women aging without children, and in my case without parents, do not have the same contacts and support as women with children, and you know that does include single mothers too within that. Said men without children also experience the same issues, of course, but and she's put a link in there as well. And of course you get single fathers as well, which is a whole other conversation. And then also Elijah makes the point that different regions have had different experiences and levels that co-ops have reached. There needs to be more exchange of cooperator experiences, and this could help show and inspire others. So that's a very good point, Elijah. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, Anna. So we're now coming towards unless Bex, do you have any? We've got the big question actually, which we ask all women. But Bex, do you have any other follow-up questions that you have before we ask?
No, not right now. No, it's been fascinating to hear you, Anna. Thank you.
Okay, and going to say we've got about 7 minutes left, so I'm going to ask Anna the question that we ask all the women as part of the Co-op Women's Voices series. But if you've got any other questions, just pop them in here, you know, and we can get them to Anna. I might have some other supplementary questions as well. But so Anna, the question that we ask all the women, and the response has been varied, is if you are stranded on a desert island and it's just you, what 3 items would you take with you and complete? And can you please then explain yourself?
Yeah, and I think I said this is probably one of the most difficult questions I've received in like modern times. And I'll tell you, this is what happened. So I was at home and I asked my partner and I said, I've been thinking about this question. What would you bring? And he just looked at me and he said, I'd bring you.
Oh.
And I said, no, and then I thought, no, which was really nice. But then I have to admit, because I never thought about bringing him.
I don't think anybody else has actually when we
so I thought that was really funny. But then, okay, here's what I do. All right, I bring the knife, right? Always good to have a knife for whatever. I would bring a mosquito net that could, 2 times as a fishing net, because as we know in lots of development contexts and so on, when you'll have especially humanitarian agencies, and so you'll hand out mosquito nets because you want to reduce incidence of malaria. But the problem is that people use them for fishing because eating is much more important than actually trying to reduce something that you don't necessarily see. But in this case, you can use it for both. And I thought, well, if I then don't bring my partner, sorry, but then I'll bring I think I'll just bring a bottle of wine, and I'll say, that first evening when I sort of set up camp and I say, okay, all right, here we are, kind of thing, just drink the wine and then take it as it comes. I think that's probably how I do it.
I mean, me and Bex can give this bottle of wine the power of constantly refilling, so you'd always have a full bottle of wine. So that's a power that we could give you. So, but no, that is a really, I mean, we've had such varied responses, haven't we, Bex? But so thanks for that. And yeah, and any further reflections or questions from everyone, because we've got 5 minutes left, but we also don't need to take it to 12 o'clock. But any other questions or reflections? Bex, is there anything in the chat?
Rebecca Hamilton said, I never thought of a fishing net / mosquito net. So I like that. Doubling up. I like it. Yeah, good.
Can I?
Yeah, go on, Anna. Oh, also Judith said, so Megan's responded about aging without children doesn't preclude women who have children. Those who may be alienated from their children or whose children have predeceased them and or their children may live too far away to provide support.
Absolutely.
Judith says, can we hear a little about the work of We Affect, please?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for asking. So as I said, We Affect is a development organization of the Swedish cooperative movement, formed by the largest cooperative companies in 1958. And so that means that our sort of owners are, the insurance cooperative housing, the farmers union, the cooperative bank, etc., etc. And we work with the right to food, meaning that we primarily support smallholder farmers to increase sustainable food production in 20 countries in the world, with the purpose of decreasing hunger and poverty. And, in these last couple of years, following the pandemic and so on, I mean, many countries around the world have been harshly struck by the economic consequences of the pandemic and now of the war in Ukraine, so that hunger is increasing to non-precedented levels. So we're now back to levels that we most recently saw during the Second World War. So this is more important than ever, is to support smallholder farmers to increase sustainable food production where they are, to feed their own populations. That's what we do. In short, support their organizations.
And the links, yeah, I've just popped the link in there. Actually, maybe we should have done that at the beginning, but thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
And yeah, just got Lucy saying very inspirational talk and important historical reflections on courts worldwide. Anna has rich global experience and feminist political perspectives that we assets to us in effect. So thank you, Lucy. Yeah, and you did talk, and we can't go on to that because we've not got enough time, but you don't remember you spoke last week about feminist principles as well, so maybe that's for another time actually. But thank you, Anna. And I just want to say thank you to everyone. There's lots of new faces today actually. You know, me and Bex have been doing these. We try to do an interview every month with an inspirational cooperative woman. So thank you to all the new people who've joined us today, and also thank you to the people who've also joined us on our journey with all these amazing women, including Anna today. So thank you, Anna, and thank you for kind of just saying yes to us, because I know you're incredibly busy and you said yes really quickly. So thank you for saying yes to us. And just stay on with me and Bex for the end of the call, but just to say thank you for everybody else as well, and some great feedback and some for this session. You know, it's been really inspirational, Anna, so thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm still absolutely flabbergasted by the opportunity. Thank you, and thank you everybody who listened, and great initiative, so thanks for that.
And it will be going online when me and Bex get organised. We're going to put all of the interviews online, so they'll go on YouTube, and you'll be able to watch them over a glass of wine, and Anna over that ever filling glass of wine. So yeah, so thank you very much.
Thank you everybody. Good luck in whatever you're doing and wherever you are.